episode 41. And today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the decisions that I've made that I thought ruined everything, but I was maybe a little bit overreacting. And I thought maybe sharing some of these things with you may help you when you are at that point in your entrepreneurship journey. Now, as entrepreneurs, of course, we all make mistakes, right? Everyone makes mistakes in life. And as an entrepreneur, we're going to make a lot of them. So we have to get used to making mistakes, and we want to treat them as essentially data for us to be able to look back on and see, why that decision was wrong and how we can learn from that decision. And we can't dwell on it because we know it's going to happen. So when we know, wrong decisions are going to happen as an entrepreneur, when we know failure is going to happen as an entrepreneur during our journey, we have to look at it a little bit differently. And it's tough to do that when you're in the moment and you're going through some failure. When you're in the moment going, man, that was a bad decision. It's tough to go through, but we want to learn what we can from it. And we want to make sure that we have it documented in some kind of way so that it's essentially treated as data of, just like you would put down and put systems in place for something that went right and a decision that was correct and things are happening. We want to do that same thing with a decision that was wrong and, write it down, keep track of it, and immediately try to implement it into systems just like you would something that's good, right? So when you find something that's great and you made a great decision in your business and you say, hey, this is working, normally our next step is to try to implement it everywhere we can, right? Everywhere in our system that we can, we want to try to implement that. So we should treat a wrong decision the same way and make sure that we essentially unimplement it, if that's even a word, across our business. So it's not just enough realizing that a decision was maybe bad or incorrect. I wouldn't even say bad. I would say incorrect. After that, more work begins. We don't just learn from the mistake, we adjust from the mistake. So we say, yeah, that didn't work. Maybe we write it down to kind of put it out and visualize it. And we say, does this apply anywhere else in our business? Is this already existing somewhere where we need to stop it or we need to change directions? And so I think that's where sometimes I struggled with, and probably a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with, is taking bad decisions and dwelling on them or being upset about them, and that emotion not actually doing what we need to do with that information, which is look everywhere in our business to see if the lesson that we learned from that mistake applies anywhere in our business. And if it does apply somewhere, we want to, take care of that, whether it's adjust it or get rid of it and say, hey, we found out this was a bad decision. We found out this doesn't work. And this part of what we're doing has that included in it. So let's take that out now that we know we have that data that it didn't work. So, there's decisions that I made where I was convinced that I ruined everything. I think as entrepreneurs, we all go through the stage where we say, oh my gosh, I made that decision. It was wrong. That ruined everything. We're never going to survive from this. I've had that happen more than a few times, and I'm sure other entrepreneurs have as well. We have to remember that, again, this is going to be part of our journey. So it's hard for me too when these things happen. And it's hard to keep that state of mind. But we just got to remember this is something, that we signed up for. This is something that we knew was going to happen. Wrong decisions, bad turns, failures, these are part of the journey. So, a popular saying is fail your way to the top, because you got to keep trying and going. And so we want to try to look at those failures that way. We want to try to learn from them, and we want to try to implement that lesson that we learned across our business in any way that it applies. So that's very important. Don't skip that step. Don't skip the step of using the failure, using the lessons that you learned from the failure to change your business, not just with that exact thing that you failed on, but look across your business and say, does this apply anywhere else in my business? Does this lesson that we learned, does this data that we got from this failing also apply somewhere else in our business? And how can we change that? I think that's a very important step. When it comes to making bad decisions and having failures, whether it's making a small bad decision, and maybe you don't call it a failure, but maybe you made a small bad decision and got off to a different trajectory than you would have liked to. When these things happen, we know that they're going to happen. So we know wrong turns are going to happen. We know mistakes are going to happen. And so we got to treat it as just part of the game. One of the great sayings for motivational speakers is that, you got to talk to enough people. Every failure is just one step closer to a sale, right? You have to talk to 100 people to get one. So you don't worry about the 99 that don't buy. You just know you got to get to 100. One of my favorite motivational speakers, Jim Rohn, says, I just move on and say, thank you for being one of the 99. Doesn't dwell on it and just knows that I have to talk to 100 people in order to make a sale. And I don't care which one you are. Maybe you're the one that buys it, or maybe you're not. But I know I have to talk to 100 because in sales, a ratio usually appears, right? And so you know that I get 1 out of 100. And so I'm totally fine with somebody being one of the 99 that doesn't purchase. And I think we have to have that mindset as entrepreneurs as well, to know that we have to fail, X amount of times before we will succeed. And we have to make X amount of wrong decisions to learn from before we will get our business to where we want it to be. So we need to look at those wrong decisions as hiccups, as data, and just know that we had to do that. We had to go through that. Now I'm just one step closer to adjusting my business, to learning from that mistake, and I'm one step closer to where I want my business to go. So I think that's a great philosophy to look at it. We're not salespeople necessarily. Some of us are salespeople, but just as entrepreneurs, as founders of businesses, I like to look at it that way too. If you're a salesperson, you get 1 out of 100. You got to call 100, so you don't mind the 99 who don't buy because you're just on your journey to call 100, and you'll get 1 out of 100. Same thing here with the entrepreneur. You're along your journey. You're going to have to learn from 10, 20, 30, 40 mistakes. And so just take it as, hey, I knew I was going to make X amount of mistakes. So that was one of them. Got through that hurdle, learn from it as much as we can, implement any lessons we learned across our business, and keep going. Eye on the prize, keep moving towards our goals. In the moment that you're making these wrong decisions, a lot of the times it feels permanent, but it usually isn't at all. So when this happens, we have to not only learn from the mistake, but implement it across the business and understand that, it's not permanent. We can always change the trajectory of where we were at with that bad decision. So some bad decisions are irreversible, right? Like, for example, I spent a ton of money on an event one time thinking it was going to, change the game. And of course it didn't. And that was a big mistake that I learned from. It was something where, I learned how to get other things out of an event that we knew was going to not make money. And so by the time the event happened, we were approaching it differently. So I tried to capitalize on it. And that was also another lesson that I learned from it. So obviously one lesson I learned was, don't pay, X amount of money for a speaker if you know that they're not going, if they're not going to bring the crowd, whatever it is. Things like that where you say, hey, I think this is going to change the game, but it doesn't necessarily change the game. And you end up losing a lot of money on it. But then I also learned the lesson of, okay, well, if we're going to lose money anyways, how do we take advantage of this event in different ways? And then that allows you, to learn from that and say, hey, even next time when we make money on an event, we're also going to do what we did last time, which is capitalize on other ways as well. So now at the next event, we're making money because we learned from that lesson with the speaker and the cost being so high. So next event, costs aren't so high. Now we're in the profit. And at the same time, we're executing the lessons that we learned from the event that didn't go well, of those extra ways to take advantage of the event and what is going on there. So now we learn from both of those mistakes and we're doing a lot better. However, we can never go back, right? We can't ever go get that money back. We can't reverse that decision. So some decisions are like that, but again, you can still learn from them. But a lot of decisions, you can just change the trajectory of what you were doing. A lot of bad decisions are not permanent, They're just, kind of a bump in the road. And if you can turn a little bit, you can avoid the next bumps in the road. And so just use that feedback from that to make that happen. So I think as entrepreneurs, sometimes we get emotional and we get caught up in feeling like everything is over. I made that big mistake. We're never going to recover from this, especially when it's a financial mistake and finances are low. I understand the feeling, right? I think most entrepreneurs, we've been there where at the end of the day, we make a bad financial decision and it seems like there's no way to climb out of it. And that's a real one, right? When you're making decisions on the processes of your business and, even the advertising and saying, hey, this happened and it's bad for us, or we're getting a bad review or whatever it is, you know, that's a little bit different and more of something you can overcome besides finances, right? Finances are real. There's no it's just that's where the rubber hits the road. If you don't have any money in the account, you don't have any money in the account, right? And that's a struggle for most entrepreneurs. So making a bad decision financially always hurts more, I would say, especially when you're starting out, especially at any time if you have no money. I mean, mind you, there's businesses that I've started that did extremely well, then did badly, then did well later. And so it's not just when you're beginning that you might run out of money. It's during your journey at different times as well. Even when you think you're way up, you can always come way down, right? So, you know, it's not necessarily a permanent thing. And I think we sometimes overestimate the damage because again, we get a little bit emotional, and we also feel like success of our business should be a linear path, right? But we need to keep in mind that it's not going to be. It's going to go up and down and up and down, and hopefully we're trending up, right, in the long run. But it's always going to have dips, and it's always going to have ups and downs. So we need to just take that into consideration as entrepreneurs and know that there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. As long as we're keeping moving forward, that is what's important, and we're eventually going to go upwards. That business is going to get to where it needs to be if you keep going. So we also need to understand that we can adapt. When we're out there as an entrepreneur and we're making bad decisions sometimes, we have to understand that we can adapt. Now, we also can understand that there are situations where we've made a bad decision and then we've learned so much from that and adapted from it that we then applied that to other parts of our business, that adaptation, and it helped our business a bunch. So sometimes even the wrong decisions can lead to great outcomes, right? When you're learning from those lessons and then applying them to what may be applicable in other places with your business. So the decisions that felt like failures but created leverage for me, these are things like when deals fell apart. To be honest with you, most of the deals that fall apart are partnerships that end or fall apart, are really from bad decisions in the first place. It's very hard working with people. It's very hard partnering with people too. I've been in some businesses where, there's companies or brokerages trying to partner together, or one brokerage be under the other, or whatever the situation is. And it's extremely difficult to make that happen. And so you realize in hindsight that, you may have made some mistakes along the way of that partnership, but really probably the wrong decision was just getting into that partnership in the first place. So when that happens, we just need to be aware that, the wrong decision was probably that first decision. And more times than not, it's probably better to, part ways when you have those disagreements. Now, I'm not saying with your business partners that you started the company with. I'm more so talking about, business relationships with maybe partnerships or joint ventures, whatever the situation is. It's typically better to, part ways amicably than to get into more of the troubles that wrong decision caused. So kind of back up and say what was the real wrong decision here was just starting to go down this road. And I think both parties have learned from it, and we should probably, part ways amicably and be able to both go learn and do well from what we learned during our partnership. I mean, that's always the hope, right? As entrepreneurs, we need to want other entrepreneurs to win. Even if we're not seeing eye to eye, even if they were previous business partners, we want to see entrepreneurs win. We know what it takes, right? We know what it takes as an entrepreneur. So we don't want to knock anyone's hustle because we know what it takes as an entrepreneur to make it. We know what it takes to run a business. So even if we have a disagreement with somebody, we go our separate ways, whatever the case is, we want to be, maybe you don't have to support, but we definitely want to respect and, encourage, right? And I think the happier we are for other people, the better that comes to us. And when you're an entrepreneur, it's easy to relate to other people's journeys. I think as an entrepreneur, I relate to so many people right off the bat when they tell me that they run a business. I know that they've been in very similar situations as me. It could be a completely different business, but we all get into these situations and we all have a similar journey as far as we've made bad decisions. We've probably been, pounding our head against the wall because there's no money and nothing that we can figure out to do. And we've all been on this journey of up, down, up, down. Everybody knows the entrepreneur journey is extremely difficult. So when you meet another entrepreneur, you're typically already on, a level of them and saying, hey, I understand this person because I know that they're going through the same things I do. I know they've gone through the same things that I do. So there's a level of, respect there, and also a level of just knowing that you've, definitely been in the same positions as entrepreneurs before. So let me go ahead and start taking some questions here. I set up some questions here. So at Kyle Hiersche or at Founding Without Funding, you can send a DM with your questions. You can ask any questions you have in the chat. I picked out some applicable questions to what we're talking about here today that were sent to my DM. So again, feel free to send in any questions you have at Kyle Hiersche at Founding Without Funding. And you can also drop them here live on the chat. We do stream this live on all the different platforms. So I have a question here from Hugo. What's a decision you made that you were sure set you back years? A decision that I made that I was sure set me back for years was definitely an event. We've had, and being an event company, when I was really big into events, being an event company is always feeling like that, especially when you're doing large events and the budget is $100,000, $200,000 for the whole event. You can make huge mistakes. The one thing with an event, everything's riding on one day. So it's difficult. Right? You have all this money. I mean, we've had $150,000 riding on one event. And if it doesn't go well, that's a huge amount of money to lose. And even if it does go well, you could still lose money. That's one of the things about events. It could look like it's packed. It could look like it was a success, but on the back end, you could still be losing big. And it's so contingent on one day. Even doing some of the events in Miami too, sometimes we'll have a yacht party involved, and the whole thing can kind of really get messed up if it's raining on the day of the yacht party. Now, it might not cost us a bunch of money, but it definitely, somewhat ruins the experience or just makes it a whole other thing and a bunch of hassles. So events are super tough. And I think that's why they're the biggest, mistakes I made that we thought set us back for years, especially the events that we did every year. So you have a really bad event because we have annual events that we'd be doing, annual conferences and conventions and things like that. So when one of the years loses a bunch of money, you kind of feel like, oh, we're never going to recover from this. We're never going to be able to do the event next year. There's not going to be a budget to do next year's event because we lost it all in this year's event. But when you learn from that, when you adjust, you can cut your budgets, you can figure out smarter ways to do things, and you just keep on going, you usually can find a way. And we always found a way to do the next year and make it happen. But definitely some of the biggest mistakes I've made were, financially for events that were all riding on one day or one weekend, and it's very easy to go negative on those. All right. Question here from Renee, did you ever feel like one bad move erased a bunch of progress? Yeah, I think, ending a partnership caused a lot of that, because when you have like a joint venture and it doesn't work out at that point, it feels like pretty much everything was a waste. Now, of course, we learn from it. We always learn from our bad decisions, but there's definitely those type of decisions where you're essentially saying, hey, we started this joint venture and it was together, but we're going to part ways. And now the joint venture essentially doesn't exist. And so that feels like a waste of time. So a waste of time, something that you can't get back. Got to look at it as a bad decision. Got to look at it as something to learn from and move forward. But definitely something that is like, hey, well, we have to chop this up to learning, because we got nothing out of it, because now this whole joint venture doesn't even exist, and so it's essentially, a waste of time. But again, learn from the mistakes and move forward. Okay, question from Colby. How do you stop replaying a decision you wish you can undo? I just try to learn from everything, right? I just try to make sure that I know that there's going to be ups and downs. I have to keep that in my mind. Now, it's easier for some, it's easier for me sometimes more than other times. Again, especially when it's financial, because financial decisions actually hurt. It's not just a sting of, dang, I wasted time, or dang, we wasted some resources, or whatever it is. But when it kills your pockets and kills your bank account, and maybe even makes your bank account go negative, that is when it's hard to get it out of your head. That's when it's replaying in your head over and over, and it essentially haunts you. The best way to get past it is, again, dissect it, see what you can learn from it, see what you can apply to other parts of your business, and just keep moving forward. All right, question here from Ariel. What's the worst decision you made that actually helped you later? Yeah, I mean, a little bit of the same answer, I guess. Typically, event type stuff, because you can't get it back, um, and then it helps you prepare for the next year. So going from losing a ton of money to actually making money, and the reason for that is because we used the lessons that we learned from the big loss, and a few big losses actually, and we're able to move forward in a positive way. And now it helps because we know how to do the events much better and how to capitalize on them, even if other things go wrong. Okay, question from Jasper. How do you know if a decision was actually bad or just uncomfortable? I think you'll see it. I think you'll see them that a decision was bad. I think most stuff is uncomfortable as an entrepreneur if we're doing it right. The most comfortable thing as an entrepreneur is like coming up with the idea and maybe even getting started, right? Maybe starting down the road, and maybe some of us love designing, the logo and website and all that kind of stuff to get started, but then kind of stop there. So that's something that's common, because entrepreneurs love to envision things, have grand ideas. I always encourage people to do that too. Bring it to life, make a logo, make a website, these things you can do for cheap or do by yourself. So I encourage that as well, but sometimes that's where we stop. And that's really the beginning. So we have to make sure that, we're doing things that are uncomfortable. If we're an entrepreneur, that's extremely important. If we're not doing things that are uncomfortable, we're probably not doing it right. And usually the things that are uncomfortable are sales. Usually the things that are comfortable are, things that have to do with paperwork, training, these type of things, manuals. A lot of that is stuff that entrepreneurs usually don't like to do. So that's the stuff that usually makes us feel uncomfortable. And those are the things that we have to push through. But I think you'll know the decision. You'll know a difference between a bad decision and something that makes you uncomfortable. Because something that just makes you uncomfortable, you should still be making progress forward with, even though you're not enjoying it, as opposed to a bad decision is, something's going wrong and you're not moving in the right direction. And so you need to adjust accordingly. All right, question here from Mallory D. Have you ever wanted to quit purely because you regretted a choice you made? Yeah. Um, there's been times where we've regretted decisions that we made, so much so that, bank accounts are negative, everything feels like it's crashing and falling, and you do want to quit. You at least want to quit that business if you have multiple businesses, right? But if that's your only business, sometimes it makes you just want to quit and give up as an entrepreneur. Now, sometimes you do need to let a business go, but you never want to let being an entrepreneur go. At least that's how I feel, is that some businesses don't work out, but you as an entrepreneur will always work out as long as you keep working. That's the key. If you're working, it will work out. So, question here from Dante. What's something you blamed yourself for that wasn't actually your fault? What's something I blamed myself for that wasn't actually my fault? I don't think anything, because one of my big philosophies is, as an entrepreneur, it's always your fault. I wouldn't, as I guess as the founder or CEO, I guess I would say it's always your fault. I did a segment on this in one of the podcasts of, we have to take responsibility as the founder, usually the CEO or the person running the company. Everything's our fault. We have to take responsibility for it. Even if it's one of our employees that made a mistake, we hired that employee. We trained that employee. We maybe refused to fire that employee when we should have. And that's why we're in the position that we are right now. So we have to take responsibility for everything as a founder and as an entrepreneur, as a CEO of a company, which a lot of us are. It's our decisions that push the company forward. Sometimes we make bad decisions, but whether it's us directly that caused it, or someone else within our business, or even a customer, an upset customer can do a lot to ruin a business, especially in the beginning with bad reviews or whatever the case is. And again, that's our responsibility too. That's our fault too, to let a customer get to the point where they would write that bad review. So we have to take responsibility for everything as founders, CEOs, entrepreneurs in general. The buck stops with us. It's a big responsibility, but it has a big payoff. And because it has a big payoff, it's difficult. There's a lot of things we're going to go through, bad choices we're going to make, but we got to keep moving forward. All right, we'll take the last question here. Last question is from, let's see here. Last question is from Reed. If you could redo one decision, would you, or would you leave it? That's a great question. It's easy to say that I wouldn't change it now because we've already learned the lesson and moved on. But I'll tell you what, some of the mistakes that were financial wise, closer during the time that it happened, I would say, please just undo that decision. Yes, I learned from it, but my gosh, I would just rather have the money, would rather not have lost all the money. So when it's happening and when it's close after it happens, yeah, for sure, I wish that I could undo it. Now, at this point, when you look back and it's that far behind and you've recovered and are doing more things, then yeah, it's easier to say, no, I learned my lesson from it, and it got me to where I am, and blah blah blah. But in the time period where it's happening, of course, you're saying, I wish I could undo that, especially if it's a financial decision that got you in a bad place, which I think all of us as entrepreneurs have made those decisions that affected us financially and put us in a bad place financially. And while it's happening, you would always say, oh, I don't care if I learned from this. I wish I could undo it and get that money back. But then later, as you are in a more comfortable place, of course, you can look back and say, well, I'm glad I went through that because I learned the lesson. But it's a lot different when reality hits and it's actually happening. So again, bad decision, it happened, and eventually, whether it's right then or later, we need to move on from it and move forward. Again, the biggest thing with just making wrong decisions and going down the wrong path is that, seeing it and adjusting course, learning from what went wrong or right. And then here's the key, applying that to everywhere else in our business. Don't just learn the lesson and say, okay, with this particular thing, we learned that lesson, we're going to change it. Step back and look at your business and say, wait, did this lesson we learned from this one wrong mistake, does this apply to anywhere else in our business? Is this something that could help us across our business? That's a big key that a lot of entrepreneurs don't do. And that's what we want to do. That's what we should strive to be doing when we make bad decisions, learn from it, and apply what we learned across our entire business, not just the one applicable to that decision. All right, with that being said, we will go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We will see you on the next